In this video we're going to talk about soldering. It's really important that any soldering you do is crisp, clean and very carefully done, otherwise you're going to end up just with bad connections. So to help us out today we've got Adam Brown. Welcome, Ad. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Now, you run a repair business, is that right?
That's right.
Guitars? Yep. So you know your way around soldering?
Sure do.
So what do we need? What's the basic setup for soldering a guitar?
So a basic soldering iron. I find you can spend a lot of money on a soldering iron, but at the end of the day I still use the $15 to $20 soldering iron.
Right.
If they break, you throw them away, you get a new one.
Okay.
The expensive ones still break.
Yeah.
So
now I've seen those at Bunnings and I think they're only about $12 or something.
that's right.
Yeah.
You can get ones you can replace the tip with as well.
Right. And, I heard you recommend something about 50 to 80 watts, is that about right?
That's right, yep. Yep, you want something nice and hot, otherwise you'll sit there for quite some time trying to get the solder to melt.
Yeah, so you want the solder to sort of melt instantly so you can work quickly. And these kits from like the hardware stores, they do come with some solder, so you won't need to outlay any more. And remember, if you don't want to go and fork out more money for more tools, you can actually take your guitar down to your local repair shop and ask them if they'll do it. And depending on how well you get on with those guys, they may even do it for free. So, so we've got the soldering iron and solder. What else do we need as far as like pliers and stuff go?
Yeah, I mean a set of cutters would be useful, just for cutting the wire where you need to cut it, and also like a small razor blade would be useful if you don't have wire strippers.
Oh, to take the plastic off the wire?
Just to take the shielding off. You can just use that and try not to cut through the actual wire.
Okay.
Saves you buying extra tools, that sort of thing, if you're just wiring up one guitar.
Alright, so soldering iron, solder and perhaps a good pair of pliers. And I noticed you've got a file here. If that's for filing off the surface of the pots?
That's right. Whenever you solder to something brand new, like a brand new pot or a brand new input socket or anything like that, usually has a little bit of shielding or it's just too smooth. So it's good to rough it up a little bit and just build a little bit of solder on it first before you try to just stick a bare wire to it, and also tin the actual wire as well. Oh,
tinning the wire, that's where you actually put a layer of solder over the wire.
Yep.
And that'll
just a very thin coat of solder over the wire. Really,
and that'll just make the connection work better. Basically.
That's right, yep.
Right, so if you don't have a file, just anything you can use, like an old razor blade or even like a kitchen knife or something to scratch up the surface of the work where you're working.
Even a nail file.
Nail file, okay. So Brandon, you were talking about tinning a wire. Do you want to just run us through what you do there?
Sure, that's not a problem. We have a shielded wire here. I'm going to use these cutters I have here, which actually just strip the end off very quickly.
Now if you don't have those, of course, you can just use a razor blade or a sharp Stanley knife or something like that, just to get the plastic off. Be careful not to cut through the wire itself.
So that'll leave the wires actually sort of hanging off the end. What's good to do is to twist them together, so that they become more one sort of piece of wire. Okay, and just run the solder along the wire and along your soldering iron. You want to get a nice silver finish to that wire.
So you've got the soldering iron there actually underneath the wire and the solder on top of the wire.
I'm sort of touching both at the same time, so touching the solder as well as the wire.
Right. Oh, I see, and so you're putting an actual coating of solder on that wire there.
That's right, yeah.
There you go, that's tinning the wire.
Clean off any excess off your soldering iron. It's good to keep your soldering iron very clean if you can.
If we don't have one of these, we can just use a sponge. Like
you can use a sponge, a wet sponge, yep. I just find these are a little better. They seem to get the excess off really well. And
don't forget, guys, if you are using a soldering iron, never leave it on a surface. You need to leave it raised so the heated bar is off any of your work area, like that.
Okay, so here's a standard pot potentiometer, they call them, pot for short, and you can rough up the top of it just with a standard file or just anything. Just scratch it up, and it's good to scratch it a good couple of different ways, like that. That will allow the solder to stick to it much better than it without doing that.
Brownie, I've heard that it's good to actually coat the tip of the soldering iron before you start work. Is that right?
That's right. If you're going to go straight away and solder from just turning the soldering iron on and you've got a clean tip, it's good to, it'll actually make the tip a little hotter if you just put a little bit of solder on the end. Then you're ready to solder straight away.
Great. Now, when we're soldering, Brownie, how much solder should we actually use?
Just enough, really, is the key, I guess. You don't want to have big mounds of solder on there. You just want to have a neat little pool. If you're getting balls of solder, your soldering iron is not hot enough.
Okay.
As I said, you can get the soldering iron a little hotter by putting some solder onto the tip of the iron. That will actually increase the temperature.
So if we grab this pot here, and we just, as an example, how would we wire up a wire to say that last contact there?
Yep, that last contact there, the best way to do it, I would do it by roughing it up just slightly first. You won't need to do too much to these parts because they do have sort of rough edges as it is, but it is helpful sometimes. So I would start by putting a small bit of solder on the actual contact of the pot, just enough so you sort of cover the hole. Then you can get your piece of wire which you've already tinned beforehand. This bit's got quite an extended piece, so I'll just cut that off, so you don't need any extra length, because you can cause a lot more earth hum and noise in the guitar by having too long a wire unshielded. So it's important just to have just enough. And then you should be able to melt that. What I'm going to do is just heat up the tip a little bit with some solder. Get a little bit, just a tiny little bit on the end there. And there we have a wire join.
And there you go. So you weren't really using much solder there, and you were just holding it in place. And then you lift away the soldering iron, just holding it in place for a second or two. That's what it's called.
Sometimes it's good to just blow on it straight after you've done it if you want it to dry really quick.
Yep. And be careful not to touch that straight away because it's obviously going to be pretty hot. So there you go. That's a well soldered connection just there.